is one of those things that don't do as I do as I say, and do as I want to do and as I'm working on doing. I'm better than I used to be. But it is hard for me to say no when people ask things. And so when should we say no, and how do we say it? And I'll tell you that I was given a couple of good ones at CR that I've added to this list. But here's a list of when we should say no. Okay? 1, you should say no when it's a promise you won't keep. And I just decided just now I'm not going to write all these out. You should say no when it's a promise you won't keep. All right? In other words, if there's a doubt in your mind that you're going to be able to accomplish what you're agreeing to, then you should just say no, or you should be upfront with this. I'll do my best. Something like that. But you shouldn't agree to things that you're pretty sure you won't accomplish. By the way, there's a parable about this exact thing. There's the parable of the 2 sons. The father comes to them and says, hey, I want you to go and do such and such a thing and accomplish it. And one son says, I'll do it. And the other son says, I won't. And the one son who says, I'll do it, doesn't do it. And the one son who says, I won't, ends up doing it. Which one is better? The one who said he won't and did it anyway, right? And that's not the direct application of that parable for this, but it's true. It's better to say no and then call you up and say, actually, I do have the margin for that. It turns out I can help you today or whatever, you know. That's better than saying, I will and then not. I can already tell this is going to be painful and convicting for me. Okay, all right, let's keep going. So when to say no, when it's a promise you won't keep. Number 2, when it's something you can't give. In other words, if it's not yours to give, or if you don't have the capability of giving it away, or you don't have permission to do that, or something else like that, you know. There are situations where it's just not yours to give. By the way, this is a situation for families, right? Sometimes you have, there are other obligations on your time. And
what about money? Then, I mean, like, I can't think of the word. It's not the tithing, but it's when
okay, yes, money. This is a major pet peeve isn't the right, it's not strong enough. Righteous indignation of mine are the guys who stand on TV and tell you to give them your last dollar. That is wrong. That is from the devil. The people who, especially, there's a very popular, in our world today, a very popular theology, and sometimes it's called health and wealth, and sometimes it's called,
Prosperity gospel.
Yeah, but this is even worse. It's where they compare giving to planting seeds. In other words, you give me seed money and God will prosper you. In other words, if you need $1,000 to pay your mortgage, send me 100. And God will take your act of faith and He will provide for you. That's wrong. One of the ways that you provide for God is keeping your financial commitments, and to the best of your ability. And so God doesn't want you to steal money that belongs to your landlord and give it to him. All right? That's not something that God wants. Now, there are difficult financial decisions and difficult situations. Don't take this as an answer to those. But if it comes between supporting the church and paying your mortgage, you should pay your mortgage. However, there are long-term things you should do. I firmly believe that people should support the work of the church if they can, and I'm a tither. However, let me finish that thought. There might be situations where you have to change things and say, well, I need to live cheaper. I can't afford this mortgage, or something like that. God doesn't promise us mansions in this world, And so we need to adjust things and stuff. But if somebody is on stage preaching and saying, give to the church, or give to me, or give to this mission, even if you can't afford it, that's wrong. You are called to say no when you're asked to give something that you cannot. All right? When to say no. Number 3, when it's wrong to say yes. You should say no when it's wrong to say yes. This should go without saying, but there's some situations that are difficult. And maybe you're in a situation where you're like, oh, I'm not sure if this is ethical or not. And you need to say, let me have some time to pray and study about this and get wise counsel from older Christians or something. But this is Satan's game, is always to try to get us to say yes when we should say no. Number 4, you should say no when it would harm you or others. I have to think about this because there are times when I can fill my schedule up by saying yes to the point that it harms my family. Or there are situations where me helping a certain person or something, they can. I can't give any good examples that are fine to share in a group. But you should not say yes when it would harm others. You should say no. Number 5, say no when it would endanger your personal walk with God or your health. All right? In other words, if you are spiritually struggling because you said yes to don't say yes to something that is going to make you struggle spiritually. The example that I give for this is on an airplane. When they give you the drill about the oxygen mask coming down, whose mask are you supposed to put on first? Yours. Why? Can't help other people if you don't have the mask on you. All right? That's counter to our instincts, isn't it? Especially for parents and for Christians, right? Our instinct is, get it on the child first. Who cares if I die? Get it on the child, right? But actually, you can't help the other person unless you put it on yourself. This is a scriptural principle as well. We help other people out of the overflow of our cup. And the best thing that you can do for your family and for those around you is to be spiritually healthy yourself. Think about this. If you are helping people to the detriment of your spiritual walk, then you are also at the same time giving them that example of risking their spiritual walk for other people. And that's detrimental to them. All right, here's the 6th thing. Well, no, I'm going to save that one. I'm going to switch them. So now this is number 6. Let me just mark that in my notes so I don't get confused here. Okay, number 6. You should say no when it's going to make you resentful. Now, sometimes that means you need an attitude adjustment, right? Sometimes that means you need to work on your heart and stuff. If you are being asked to do something that you should do, and this is not a free pass, right? Well, I'm not going to serve God at all because it makes me resentful. Right? And so you need a heart adjustment there, right? But You should say no when it's going to make you resentful. And here's the seventh thing. You should say no when you don't have to and you don't want to. Let me say this again because I'm already getting funny looks. You should say no when you don't have to and you don't want to. In other words, it is okay sometimes as Christians to just say no when it's not something that God necessarily has commanded you to do and it's not in your gifting and calling. Now listen, there are times, many times, when God calls us to do stuff that we don't want to. In fact, most of the time, God does not call me to do what I want to do. I just do what I want to do. Usually, if God's calling me to do it, it's something that I don't want to do. All right? Now, I have gifting and I have calling and I have things that I just enjoy because that's how God wired me. I like preaching. I think it's crazy that not everybody wants to be a preacher. To me, it's the best job in the world, and it's a blast. In fact, if all I ever had to do was preach, that'd be awesome. Okay? There's different gifting, right? God doesn't have to be, Bob, you have to preach. There are things, that God calls us all to do that we don't want to do. And we have to do those things. If God's calling you to do it, then you have to do it. All right? However, if you're not necessarily hearing from God or you don't have a clear understanding that this is something that God is calling me to do, and you don't feel like it's something you want to do, there are situations when it's okay where you have permission as a Christian to just say no. And you don't have to give a lengthy explanation. You can just say, no, not today. That's totally fine. So let me go over these one more time. You can say no when it's a promise you won't keep. You should say no when it's something you can't give. You should say no when it's wrong to say yes. You should say no when it would harm you or others. You should say no when it would endanger your health or your walk with God. Number 6, you should say no if it's going to make you resentful. And number 7, you should say no when you don't have to, you don't want to. For example, when God is not calling you to. All right? There's a little sign that's on my desk that I think was taped up when Chuck was there, and I left it there. And it just says, a need does not necessarily constitute a calling. And I like that. A need does not necessarily constitute a calling. The fact of the matter is that there are so many needs around us. There's so much need around us. The opportunities to minister and to help people are endless. We are surrounded by hurting people. And if we just open our eyes and take a look around us, there are so many things that we can be doing to help. However, we cannot do it all. Yes?
I heard 2 things
Yeah.
very recently that just have, they're very much along with the line of what you're saying, but one is, I don't remember, I think it was like a parenting thing I was listening to, and they were talking about, what you say yes to, kind of what to say no to and what to say yes to, and they said, you need to think about what I'm saying yes to today, what does that mean later in the week, later in the month that I have to say no to, because you only have the capacity for so much. And then the other thing that I heard, I was talking with a friend about it, and she was saying that she had heard from, again, a podcast or a sermon or something, but they were talking about sometimes when we say yes to something we're not being called to, we're taking that opportunity away from someone who is being called to that, because we're just feeling like we should say yes
Those are both really good. I don't know if you guys heard all that. She said on the one hand, sometimes when we say yes to somebody here, we're saying no to somebody later. That's true. I heard this in a ministry thing, I don't know, months ago or a year ago. I don't know how long it's been now. But it was somebody who said, if you as a minister, sometimes if you say yes to somebody on Thursday, you're saying no to everybody in your church Sunday morning. If you did something that stopped you from doing your sermon preparation, right? I'm called to preach. If I feel my schedule so full during the week that I can't prepare to preach, then I'm saying no to God and to all of those things, the people that I'm supposed to be preaching to, if I didn't take the time to prep it. So there are times when you as a person have to say no to people because saying yes is saying no to something later. And then the second thing you said was really good.
That you're
Yes.
taking yes might be taking a calling. If it's not your calling, it's taking away someone else's calling to say yes.
Sometimes when we say yes to something that is not in our calling, we're taking that away from somebody else. This is very true because a lot of us, if you have that little part of your brain that just knows you're the best at everything, and some days I have that very strong within me, and you just, if I did it, I could do it better. They can't do it as good as me, right? By the way, both of these are true in parenting on a large scale, all right? Sometimes saying yes to something else is saying no to our families later on. But then also, your kids need the opportunity to learn and to grow. And if you do everything and don't let them have the opportunity to learn how to do things or take care of things or solve some problems on their own, then you are stealing their opportunity to learn and grow and use the gifts that they have.
I think pastors have trouble with this, to say no. My husband did. He didn't know how to delegate.
Probably why he taped it on his desk.
We're smaller then, and a lot of people at work, and so he's charging people and doing stuff. He had a hard time delegating for fear something would work out right. I remember a delegation, not a delegation, but a situation with you, not that long ago, when the fellows were working on that shed over there, and they said, go back to your office. We can do this, and sometimes, you just came out to do that, and they said no.
This is another example, not to, I try really hard not to give Chuck credit for anything, but a huge blessing of having somebody like Chuck who really understands that sort of thing is that he came in my office and I said, he asked what was going on or something the day out. I'm going to go out and try to fix that shed or whatever. And he said, I'll help you. What time are you going to do it? Which was a lie. And I told him what time I was going to do it. And I was going to run and get something from home or whatever. So I stopped out and looked at it earlier. And Chuck and Mark Steneman is guilty in this too. Were out there already. They already almost had it done. And they told me to leave to get out of there. And that's a way that we can help each other out as Christians too, by protecting each other's time. By the way, as a church, this is important, right? Because we should not expect everybody to be at everything. And I'm not just talking about me, I'm talking about everybody, right? You have to protect your family time. And if you come to every single event that the church has and things, especially as we grow, we're going to do more specialized things, hopefully, And it's going to be... And by the way, as a parent too, you know the pressure. We live in the age of Pinterest and parenting books and podcasts, and every single person tells you, if you don't do this with your kids, if your kids aren't taking a music lesson, if they don't know guitar, piano, and Greek, and if they can't if they're not playing 2 sports every season and going to all the camps and doing all of the extracurriculars and having 3 friends and a coffee group and a book club, and if you as a parent, then if you're not doing this, and this, and you're not doing everything to the nth degree, then you're a failure, right? Not only that, but it goes on and on. One that we feel very strongly is birthday parties, there's just some amazing parents who are just great at birthday parties, all right? And none of those things are wrong, okay? I was tricked into doing an actual example. None of those things are wrong, right? My kids do piano, and play a sport and things like that. But there's a pressure. Your kid's only going to be this young for this amount of time. The clock's ticking. If you don't do everything, they won't have the childhood of their dreams. If they don't own a horse, a pony, and a dog, and then, on and on and on and on and on. To do half of that stuff, you would die. And your child would suffer because they never spend time with you. They never spend time of rest. And because their parent would be hanging by their last thread. You have to say no to some things that are actually good sometimes.
And let me tell you something.
Please do.
I have, if somebody says to you, are you sure you can handle this, or are you sure you have the time? Don't ever take that as a negative, especially if you know the person well. You know they're of good heart. I'll tell you, Bobby has always been very, very conscious and protective of my time.
I've always done everything right. That's just a given.
And there have been times when I've said, yeah, I can handle that. And he'll say, really? Are you sure? And I appreciate that. I know where I'm at, and I know what I can do, what I can't. But I appreciate the fact that he is concerned about my time.
Right, and there's a danger in churches too, that there's a core group of people who does everything. And here's the thing, I'm going to just lay this out there. I don't believe that people should retire from helping in the church. All right? We need workers. The workers are few. Pray to the Lord of the harvest. The workers are few. All right? Now, I will say, this church is blessed with a large core group of people who work really hard. But we as a church need to be very careful that we're stewarding that. And also that if we're growing as a church, we're plugging new people in, which we don't always do the best job of. But there's all these opportunities for people to serve and to help out. And so plugging new people into those things actually helps them grow, helps us grow. And anyway, all right. Here are some things you can say. And I took this, somebody. Bob.
Yeah, I'm going to probably be a little vulnerable here.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like I have this problem in this church, but I was fellowshipping years ago with a ministry that would kind of brush me aside when I wanted to help because I couldn't see, and they assumed what I could and couldn't do. And frankly, I won't use the word I'm thinking, but that irritated me. That was very offensive. It kind of teed me off. But don't assume what people can and can't do. Let them demonstrate or tell you, or
Yeah.
people will let you know. Yeah, I can do that, or no, I don't want to get up on that ladder. I'd get up on a ladder in a heartbeat. But but just let people do stuff in
Hey, I appreciate that. I'm glad you feel that way. I know we don't do that perfectly, but God is always calling people to more, to higher levels of service and gifting, which means that we are being constantly surprised by the people around us. That there's growth that happens. I love the quote, one of the problems in life is that people change and they forget to tell you about it. Right? And so sometimes we're surprised that person's doing this and this person's doing that. I got to go back to visit a church a while back after 15 years of not being there. And the guy that got up to do the communion meditation, I would never have thought he'd ever do a communion meditation, you know? And that's just how church is. We aren't who we used to be. God is continually changing us and shaping us. I do things that I never thought that I would do. And the same thing for the people around. And I'm preaching to the choir in this room because so many of you are just growing and God is calling you to more things. And that's super exciting. Yes?
I can say something about you.
This is not Compliment Bob Day. I'm going to start getting a big head and I got to fit through these double doors afterward.
This is you saying yes to something that you really should have said yes to when I called you up and told you there was a bat.
Libby, we were never going to tell anybody about that story.
Did I promise this? I promise and shouldn't have.
Yeah.
He is afraid of bats. But yet he did come over. The bat was hanging on my curtain in the bedroom. And finally I said, you go get some, put the bat in. And he gave me this big, huge glove. I put this glove on and I grabbed the whole
All right, okay. I think I'm going to successfully get through those doors.
But you tried.
She was telling how I was trying to rescue her from a bat and ended up being a support group for her.
But you did try. You said
And I have successfully removed bats.
since then.
All right, let's keep moving.
Can I just say one quick
Yes.
thing about I can't remember the connection now, but we change.
We do.
I love little kids.
Mm.
I love babies. I always have. I'm like my mother. I always want to grow up and be a mom. And I'd stay in the nursery. I can't do that anymore. I don't have the energy. I don't have the health
Mhm.
for it. There are other things that I used to do. Okay, so I look around. What else can I do?
Mhm.
So I just quietly pick up another strand somewhere.
Mhm.
You know, I can't stay with the babies, but I can sure as heck talk with them and their parents here in the church. So, if you can't do something you used to do, find something else that you would like to do. Try it. If it doesn't work out, then you find something else. There's jobs for everyone of every age, every ability.
Right. And you should know too that as a church, like there are times when we have to say, we as a church don't have the margin to take on this project, or to take on this battle or this need, or we're not a mega church. We can't have a support group for everything and every need and stuff. We are trying our best, to do everything that we can, but we just have to recognize that if we were limitless, we wouldn't need God. And just so you know, we do need Him. All right. Really quickly, I got this from, I don't remember if it was a podcast or a video or something, but it's a list of ways to say no. This actually helped me. Okay, so I'm going to share it with you. Here's some things you can say no if you're a person who has trouble saying no. I'm honored, but I can't. I'm at capacity right now, and I can't add anything else. Thanks for thinking of me, but I can't. I can do that. I can't do that, but I can do this for you. You know, saying that's outside of my capabilities or my margin or whatever, but here's another way. You are important to me, and I do want to help you. Here's another thing I can do. I wish there were two of me so I could do both things at once. I'm sorry, I have other commitments. Some of you, all that, you're like, that's ridiculous. That's so easy to say all those things. Some of us are not gifted with that capacity the same way, and we're just at heart, just want to please everybody. And our weaknesses are our strengths. You know, the capacity to say yes to somebody is a gift. The difficulty in saying no is something to work on. The capacity to say no is a gift. And learning to say yes can be a difficulty.
My wife used to always say, just tell them I'm not available.
Yeah.
Don't have to explain.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yes, Sarah. My plate is as full as I like it. Yeah, I've had situations. This is how bad of a problem I have sometimes. I've had situations where somebody has asked me to help them, and I've said no. Because, well, for one thing, I try to keep Friday evenings home if I can, as much as possible. I try to keep Friday evenings open. We do our family fun night and stuff and things. And so I've told people no, and that I couldn't help out with a project or something on a Friday evening. Hopefully none of you. And then I feel like I have to sneak in and out of my house because I don't want people to know that I'm just home playing board games with my kids. Yeah, but sometimes we're like that, right? So some of you got this. You don't, it doesn't bother you. But if you're like me and you're deep down a people pleaser, this can be a pretty big struggle. All right, here's the list. I wanted to give you, yeah.
Build on what Sarah said. Right now, my plate is overflowing.
Yeah, you can tell people that too. Right now it's overflowing, I just can't. Here's a list, by the way, of sometimes why we say yes when we shouldn't. Sometimes we say yes when we shouldn't out of fear, and we need to name that. Sometimes we do it out of obligation that we shouldn't have. We do have obligations, by the way. No matter who you are, you have several callings in your life. If you're a human being, which is most of us, then you're called to serve and follow Christ. If you're married, you are called to be a spouse. If you have children, you are called to be a parent. If you have a job, you are called to do your work heartily as to the Lord and not for men. No matter who you are, you've got callings, and it's a healthy thing for me to say no. One of the things that I've done is I sit down and I made a list of everything that I am sure that God has called me to do. And then I can say, that's outside of my calling. Anyway, sometimes we say yes when we shouldn't because we have a desire to be loved. But real love should be unconditional in that sense. Sometimes we say yes when we shouldn't because we're just distracted in the moment, or we're not paying attention, or we're not watching our words. Some of us don't pay attention to our words, and so we say things flippantly. I promise I'll pray for you. You know, we just say things sometimes we don't really mean it. That's bad.
Thank you.
I don't know who said that. Hi. All right, well, let's close in prayer. Father, thank you so much for your love, for your care for each of us. And I pray that you'd help us to have our yes be yes and our no be no. Please teach us and when to serve you and focus our hearts that way. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you all for coming.